Hi, just wanted to say thanks for watching our video. We're excited to share today with you some information, some stuff about our story at Kroger, about evolving our API strategy. So first of all, I want to go ahead and say, you may already be familiar with Kroger. Hopefully you're actually a Kroger customer. Maybe you've tried some of our e-commerce offerings, either pickup or delivery, or maybe even ship. So interestingly, you may be a Kroger customer and not even realize it. We actually operate under about 20 different banner names. From Fred Meyer to Smith's to Baker's Plus, we operate under different banner names in different parts of the country, and each of those stores are often a little different based on who they are. We operate over 2,500 grocery retail stores, 1,500 fuel centers, and 2,000 pharmacies. We're also the nation's largest florist. I want to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Michael Richardson. I'm an engineering manager at Kroger in the API program space, specifically for the developer marketplace.
And hi, glad to be with you all today. I'm Tony Bommarito. I am also an engineering manager at the Kroger company in the API program. My area that I focus on is around API products, specifically commercial and public and partner APIs, as well as our integration layer and enablement team, which I'll speak about a little later. So as Michael was mentioning, your first thought about Kroger is probably not APIs. It's probably somewhere like thinking about milk, eggs, bread, and such. But I can assure you that we have plenty of tech. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this particular slide, but these are just some of our things that we're proud of that we've accomplished over the last 5-6 years in our API program. It's been an evolution, and that's what we're going to talk to you about today. So as I was mentioning, we have plenty of tech at Kroger and have for many years. We've had APIs in some way, shape, or form for a very, very long time. Going back to SOAP and predating that with EDI and even things prior to that. We've always had a need to communicate and exchange information in a protocoled fashion with other organizations. So this has been, important to our organization for a long time. But APIs in general have been kind of very team, product specific. They lacked organization. It really wasn't until our first foray into e-commerce that we really started taking this, looking at this as a holistic and more unified and strategic approach to the way we handle APIs. So a little bit of that story, and I called it backing into an API program because that's how I kind of feel it happened. One back, please. Actually, so was our first foray into e-commerce was around, we went out of the gate with a package solution, an e-commerce platform, and it served us well to get speed to the market, but it didn't take us long to realize that it was not going to work for us long term. There are some unique challenges with grocery that we had to address, and just thought it would be better to do it by creating our own, building our own system. One of those challenges back in that time was, most e-commerce platforms accounted for 5, 6, 15 maybe items in a cart. Well, you think about groceries, you have 50, 60, potentially 100 unique items, which is very challenging. Had some issues that came along with it from a performance standpoint. And there was a lot of unique differentiators in the market for our organization that realized that we didn't want to be beholden to some other organization's feature timeline for releases. So we decided to go a better way. Or I should say a different way. And of course, we went down the route of microservices. So we started strangulating and working towards this. And one more. And the next thing you know, I think many people remember this this time, especially if you're in the development space. Woohoo! We're all doing microservices. We had services for everything, and it was great. We had decoupling. Teams could work independently. All the great things you get with microservices were really working in our favor. We were strangulating our monolithic application. But there was also some challenges that came along with that. Suddenly, we had multiple teams building the same product, and we just didn't know that they were building the same product, because that happens in large organizations at times. We had lack of consistency across those products. We had various authorization and authentication models to deal with, and we had new types of consumers in this ever-evolving landscape that was happening very quickly for us. So we had new challenges for us that were just that we had to solve.
So we're going to talk about a few different areas of focus today that our API program has really dove into, and ones that we think are going to be relevant to our viewers here. So we're going to talk about consistency, discoverability, accessibility and enablement, and also talk about a general culture shift within the organization. So go ahead, Tony.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. So I'm going to talk about consistency, and we're going to start with this. We're going to start with the first thing that we had to address with our consistency standpoint was dealing with the style guide. And we realized early on every team was kind of building APIs a little differently than the next team. Everything looked a little bit different. We had some center of excellences going on, so there was developer, some consistency, but it was pocketed. It really was not formally addressed. So decided to go down the route of formulating a style guide. And like any good organization, we went out there and saw who was doing style guides really well. And we quickly adopted that, made some changes, revisions to those best in class, and realized early that that we didn't stick the landing on the first version of that. We're on version 4, so that should give you some insights that we quickly, we had to iterate and just and it wasn't necessarily that we had challenges that was wrong out of the gate. We just had evolving scenarios as well that were not addressed in that early rendition. One of the things that we are proud of that we kind of went out of the gate with on the style guide aspect was that making this a grassroots organization or grassroots endeavor, having developers be this developer fed and including them in the process of how we wanted this to look, our APIs. And that was an important concept for advancing this and getting that consistency over time. As far as compliance with the style guide, one of the tools that we developed that really helped advance this was creating a linter service. That just gave feedback to the developers that their specs were in compliance, showed issues where they were out of compliance with our API style guide documentation. Some of the feedback we got on that was that it was a little bit too request response. There was a little bit of lag in there. So what we've actually evolved that to, in the spirit of iterative development, which you'll continuously hear us talk about, was that we turned that into a live linter. We're still getting feedback on that. So now you can kind of collaborate on this. You get that quick feedback. We've expanded the schema validations it can do. But it's really been helpful to evolve and keep teams in compliance with our style guide. Do we still have exceptions? Absolutely. And they're warranted, so we deal with those. But the most part, if you're building traditional, kind of a boilerplate API, the style guide should be able to address the majority of your concerns. Some of the other things we're trying around the compliance aspect, not trying to be punitive, but trying to make it fun. So we're just looking at badging and gamification as well. All right, and then, so as I touched on this earlier, security is a huge topic, very broad, but in this specific example around consistency, it was around the authentication and authorization models that we really had some challenge. We had API keys, we had basic auth, we had digest. If you name it, we probably had it out there, and we still have pockets of those things. But we saw that OAuth 2 was gaining momentum across the industry. We took our partners in InfoSec along for that ride, worked with them to get that adopted into into our API program so that we could exchange information in a standard format with our external, internal, and public partners. And that's been really good, really positive to move us in a more consistent implementation fashion, and also abstracted away the security components to some degree.
Cool. Thank you, Tony. Next, we're going to talk about discoverability. And in a large organization, it can take some work to find the APIs you need, or even to determine if they exist. So, before we built the API platform, how did developers go about finding the API that they needed? Well, the easiest way to find the API you need was to search Confluence. I'm just kidding. Everyone knows that Confluence is where knowledge goes to die. In reality, the best way to find APIs was often to find a well-connected coworker, and they would direct you to another well-connected coworker who would find the developer that had built an API that worked for that, and they would send you the Swagger docs for the necessary API. Now, sometimes you wouldn't find that other API, and then maybe you'd create your own, and then you'd learn about one with duplicate functionality 6 months later. Clearly, a more reliable system was necessary. So that brings us to the API catalog. Our API team set out to create a canonical source for consumers by cataloging all of the APIs at Kroger. Now, this group worked to collect the OS specs for all those APIs and then store them in a central repository. So this became a very significant effort requiring a lot of communication and collaboration. The API catalog was published, and a lot of the APIs were registered, and an API discovery got easier. And this was the start of our developer portal, which we currently call the developer marketplace. But there's a challenge with that strategy in that it can be it's often no better than Confluence if those specs aren't kept up to date. So the API team went about building some code that could be run in pipelines to submit that OS spec with every new deploy to production. So Developer Marketplace has become a critical part of our API program, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. Next, we're going to talk about a little bit about accessibility and enablement. The first item that we're going to discuss is app registration. So this is one of the next things that we built out in the developer marketplace. And initially, the primary need was external app registration, so that external third parties could request access to various APIs. But we've also developed this for internal use as well in different ways. And that's working out really well, helping to simplify access to APIs. Also, we determined that, when you have APIs, they're no good if somebody can't get to them. And sometimes the old way to get to them was a little convoluted and difficult to do that, especially when you're trying to expose to a third party. So we went ahead and rolled out a gateway, which has been through several iterations, but it allows simplified access, especially from external consumers, but we're also using it for internal consumers as well. Tony?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm going to speak. I mentioned earlier I would talk a little bit about enablement. And for enablement, we actually stood up a team called the enablement team. And what this team was dedicated to was a lot of our doc writing and making sure we had curated quality documentation for our API program platform and registration processes and everything else that goes along with that. They're also kind of on the responsible for evangelizing our API program as well, and offering that consulting aspect, because there are edge cases that we butt up against all the time, and we'd love to automate everything, but we're not quite there. So they kind of fill that gap to make sure and kind of bring our developers and partners along for the ride, making sure that they have a good experience using our tools, platforms, and associated with our program. And then, as Michael alluded to earlier, and I did as well, documentation is front and center for us. We kind of live and die by this within our space. Always looking for opportunities to serve this information up in more meaningful manner. But it all starts with having quality documentation and having tech writers having a curation process to validate that the documentation is effective and being used wisely.
And the developer marketplace has played a role here in creating a central location for this documentation, as opposed to it being spread all over the place.
Yep, thanks, Michael. And then I'm going to just bring this up just around accessibility. One of the things that we also did as part of the program was creating this integration layer. We have many partners that we work with in our e-commerce space that do work on behalf of our organization. And we have in the way we exchange that information and control those scenarios is through APIs. So as opposed to having internal teams, multiple internal teams dealing with multiple external partners, what we did is create an integration layer that we could abstract that away from both parties and manage contracts within this integration team, so that internal teams could focus on dealing with an internal contract that was facing, and then external partners could deal with one team and work through those things. We could also put us in a position where if there were changes externally, we could absorb those without making breaking scenarios in our APIs. This has been successful for us. It's something we keep an eye on to see, as it continues to evolve, that it doesn't become unwieldy, but it was a good model for us to go out of the gate with. And then culture shift. This is extremely, extremely important to our organization. And probably, none of the stuff above gets done without a shift in the culture within a large organization like such as Kroger. One of the first components of this culture shift we focused on was API first strategy. And what that means, it can mean many things to many people. But for us, it was really about working with contracts first, API contracts, and establishing before any code was written, development, any of that's done, we actually work with our partners or internal consumers and say, what is it that we want to deliver? What does that final contract look like? And once that's established through an OAS doc, we can then let teams go off and the client can do their development. They could stub these things out. The developers can go build the API. The QA team can actually start building test cases around the OAS, the spec. And this really dovetails very nicely into our next culture shift, which was shifting everything left. Identifying, because now we could test earlier, teams got in there and were able to start working and doing the development. They discovered issues earlier in the process than later. And this is extremely important. And we continue to have really good success in this area. This isn't necessarily part of our API program itself. We are a consumer of this aspect or this of governance, but it is so important that it's worth calling out because it's enabled us to move things forward at a speed that matters within our organization. In large organizations, in the past, if you wanted to expose data, share it with the external partners, there was a process to do it, but it was very inconsistent at times. What we've stood up within our organization is having a data sharing governance that actually meets, discuss these things. We actually, have a schedule. We can go to these, get time on a calendar. We get consistent answers. It's well thought out, and it really has enabled us to moving things forward instead of just throwing up blockers. And lets us all, work to what are the things that we need to do to put in place to feel good about sharing this data and the information out with other parties. And then APIs products. This was looking at our APIs as the application was a little bit of a mind shift for us. Traditionally, you look at the e-commerce solution, that is the application, or where I built an app. Looking at these individual pieces that serve the holistic solution as a product was very important. It not only just marketing or just packaging that up internally and showing the value of them, but the really important part of APIs as a product is they don't just serve maybe one use case. You can have that same API obviously serving multiple use cases, and that's the beauty of them, which kind of leads into the next and final point on this, which is reusability. Building it once and consuming it, using it many times. I build an API, it can be consumed, and it could be, if I build a catalog, it can be consumed by external partners, internal partners. It doesn't necessarily have to live with any specific application, and that reusability component is very, very important to our organization.
So I'll talk a little bit about our future focus, some of the things that we're looking at, really leaning in on as we move forward. So first of all is self-service. A lot of our stuff is able to be used, but it requires some manual work in there. And so we want to more fully enable those self-service functionalities. We obviously want to continue reducing time to market by enhancing all of our capabilities and actually throwing in one of Tony's favorites here, leveraging some AI and ML to enhance our offerings. Some key takeaways that we want to make sure that we leave you with is continuous iteration. It's always best to get something out there, get it used, and then you can start to iterate on that. Governance is your friend. It actually can be helpful to streamline your processes. You need to focus on that grassroots adoption. The top-down approach is going to be much less effective than really advocating with the developers directly. And shift left for speed and quality. That's something we've seen time and time again, just helping us to move forward. With that, also want to say, if you're watching this, we'd love for you to give it a try. Go to developer.kroger.com. You can get on there, register an app, check out the public APIs we have available, start building an app that uses those. There's a lot of opportunities, and we've seen some really cool things come out of that. With that, we want to say thank you. We appreciate your time and that you decided to join us for this video, and look forward to what you build on developer.kroger.com.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.